Now, up until this point, we have talked about rational numbers because those are going to be your perfect squares, your perfect cubes, the square roots, the cube roots, those kinds of things. Those are going to be numbers that are called rational numbers. And the reason they're called rational numbers is because they are decimals that end or repeat. For example, the number 4 is rational because it's 4.0, decimal ends. Point repeated 3 is going to be a rational number because it's a decimal that repeats. The other thing about repeating decimals or decimals that end are going to be that they can be written as fractions. As you've seen, when we converted the repeating decimals to fractions, we can write any repeating decimal as a fraction. There are the opposite of those, which are called irrational numbers. And irrational numbers are any number that's not a perfect square. And it basically means the square root's not going to work out evenly. So if I said, what's the square root of 17? Well, that's not going to work out evenly. Because there's no number times itself that equals 17. If I said, what's the square root of 6? That's going to be irrational because there's not one number that you can multiply by itself and get 6. So identifying an irrational versus a rational number is just understanding, does it work out evenly if I take the square root? Or will it work out evenly, basically? If you do not have a rational number and you're asked to take the square root, you can estimate what it will be. And here is the steps written below, but I think if I go through it and just read off the steps, it's going to be confusing. So let's take a look at the example regarding estimating the square root of 45. So we follow these steps. And the first thing we're asked to do is the square root of 45. We want to know what two perfect squares is 45 between. Well, we know that 45 is close to 49, right? And then if you think about all the perfect squares, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, we would note that hey, 45 is going to be here. So 45 is somewhere between 36 and 49, right? And so the square root of 45 should be somewhere between the square root of 6 and 7, okay? Because the square root of 36 is 6 and the square root of 7 is 49. So we know we're dealing with something between 6 and 7. So that's going to be our decimal. Now, we are then asked to find the distance between the smallest perfect square and the irrational number. We subtract. So our irrational number is 45. And the smallest perfect square is 36. So we are saying 45 minus 36, which gives us 9. Next step, we're asked to divide the difference. We know difference means subtract, which would be 9. Divide the difference by the distance of the two perfect squares. So the two perfect squares are 49 and 36, so we can subtract 49 and 36, and we get 13. So what we are saying is 9 divided by 13. Thirteen can't go into 9. 13 goes into 90 6 times. And 6 times 13 is 78. We subtract 90 minus 78. And we get 12. Now, here's how you know how far to go, is we are going to estimate it. We're going to go out to the nearest hundredth to help us round. You could technically keep going if you really needed to. So now we're saying 13 into 120. And that's going to be 9 times. And 9 times 13 is going to equal 117. Subtract, you get 3. So we're going to go ahead and do it to the nearest tenth. If you were asked to do it to the nearest hundredth, you would go out again and get 2. Now notice it's not going to end. Just be aware it will not end. This decimal is this is an irrational problem. It's not going to end. It's going to go on forever and ever, or at least kind of a thing, so just be aware of that. So if I was rounding to the nearest hundredth, I would say, what does the 2 make the 9 do? But we're not rounding to the nearest hundredth. We are rounding to the nearest tenth. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, what does the 9 do to the 6? Well, we know the 9 makes the 6 go up, so we know it's going to be 0.7. So we get 0.7. Now, to figure out what the final answer for the square root of 45 is, if we are somewhere between 6 and 7, we know the whole number has to be 6, and then the decimal point would be 7. If we were rounding to the nearest, so that's rounded to the nearest tenth. If we were rounding to the nearest hundredth, it would be 6.69. So that's your approximate. If you were to go about this and do this in the calculator, you end up with 6.708. So take a look at what we got in the calculator. 6.708. Look what we ended up with. 6.7 or 6.69, depending on where they wanted you to go. That's pretty close. So just understand that because you're estimating, it's not going to be exact. Sometimes it might, but usually it won't. And you're going to end up something very similar, something very close. And that is how you estimate the square root of an irrational number.